All right, everyone, welcome. I want you to think of this as the lecture you never had, the missing chapter in your textbook. Today, we're diving into the vast and frankly profound world of Indian knowledge systems.
So let me start with a question for you. What if the way you were taught to see the world, to understand science, philosophy, and even consciousness itself, was missing, like, half the story? What if there was this other, equally rigorous tradition of inquiry that just wasn't on the syllabus? You see, for many, the absence of these systems from modern education isn't just some academic oversight. It's been called a cultural derooting. It's like being disconnected from this massive intellectual heritage that led to incredible breakthroughs in math, medicine, and even physics.
Okay, so what is it that makes this tradition so different? Well, it all begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, a completely different starting point for understanding reality itself. And this right here, this is probably the most crucial idea to grasp. It's a total paradigm shift. Modern science, for the most part, operates on an outside-in model. It starts with matter and then tries to explain how consciousness comes from it. Indian systems, they flip that completely on its head. They propose an inside-out model, where consciousness is the fundamental reality and matter actually emerges from it. And it's so important to get this. These aren't just abstract intellectual exercises to debate in a classroom. Each system, or darshana, is considered a single vision, a complete integrated framework for living and for understanding. They're meant to be practical paths, not just theories on a page. So here's a little map of this whole landscape. The Darśanas are broadly sorted into two main categories. You've got the Āstika, or Orthodox schools, which accept the ancient texts known as the Vedas as their authority. And then you have the Nāstika, or Non-Orthodox schools. You've probably heard of some of these, like Buddhism and Jainism. And they reject the Vedas. This setup created this incredibly rich, diverse, and often fiery intellectual environment. But here's the interesting part. Despite all their differences and debates, most of these schools share this common bedrock of beliefs. They see the entire purpose of philosophy as soteriology, a fancy word for a practical path to freedom from ignorance. They all operate on the law of karma, the idea of reincarnation, and the ultimate final goal of moksha, or total liberation. Okay, so that's the big picture. Now let's zoom in on one of these schools, just to see how remarkably detailed they were. We're going to look at a system that developed what you can really only call a form of ancient physics, and it is wild. We're talking about the Nyāya Vaiśeṣika school. It actually started as two separate systems, Nyāya, which was this really sophisticated system of logic, and Vaiśeṣika, a detailed atomic theory. Eventually, they merged together to form this incredibly powerful tool for investigating the material world. And what did they investigate? Get this. They developed a theory of indestructible atoms. They formulated laws of motion, and they had a concept of gravity. Now, all of that might sound pretty familiar, right? But now, you have to consider the timeline. These ideas were being systematically proposed, debated, and written down about 800 years before Sir Isaac Newton. Let that sink in for a second. 800 years. The principles laid out in their ancient texts are just stunning. First, a change of motion is due to an impressed force. Second, that change is proportional to and in the direction of the force. And third, action and reaction are equal and opposite. The parallels to Newtonian mechanics are just undeniably there. And it gets even more specific. The founder of the Vaiśeṣika school, a sage named Ṛṣi Kaṇāda, even identified a specific cause for why objects fall to the earth. He called it gurutva, which literally means heaviness, or, you guessed it, gravity. This wasn't just philosophy. This was a serious attempt at a rational, physical explanation of the universe. But this raises a really fascinating question, right? If they were developing physics, what was the point? Why go to all the trouble of figuring out atomic theory and laws of motion? Well, the answer takes us right back to the core of this entire Indian worldview. The ultimate goal was never just to understand matter for its own sake. It was always a tool to achieve moksha, the liberation of the self from suffering and from the endless cycle of rebirth. So, the crucial point is this. The logic, the physics, the epistemology, they were all tools. They were instruments designed to help a person get a clear, true understanding of reality. And by doing that, they could dismantle the ignorance that's seen as the root of all suffering. In this system, knowledge wasn't just for knowing. It was for transformation. And, the tradition was also really practical. It recognized that people learn differently, so it offered different paths. There's the creationist view we've been talking about, Nyāya Vaiśeṣika, which sees effects as brand new creations. Then you had the Sankhya Yoga path, which saw things as already existing inside the cause. And finally, the Vedanta path, which taught that all the variety we see in the world is just names and forms masking a single underlying reality.
And that brings us to our final thought. If one of these schools could anticipate Newton's physics by nearly 2 millennia, it really forces us to ask, what other truths about consciousness, about reality, and about the nature of the self is this lost chapter of our education just waiting to teach us?